My late husband's will had one condition. I had to live in his abandoned house for a month. Her voice dripped with fake concern, but I could see the greed burning in her eyes. She wanted me to walk away. They all did. Robert's son Marcus wouldn't even look at me, just stared at his phone like this was boring him. Have you ever felt that creeping doubt about someone you trust completely? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. I thought I knew my husband of 40 years until his will forced me to spend a month alone in his childhood home. What I found there would destroy everything I believed about our marriage. Hidden in the walls were letters, love letters, to another woman, dated throughout our entire marriage. Have you ever discovered that your entire life was built on a lie? Have you ever felt that creeping doubt about someone you trust completely? This is about more than infidelity. It's about a secret that could tear apart everything you've built. Stay with me to discover how one woman's courage to face the truth changed everything. If you've ever questioned what you really know about the people closest to you, this story will shake you. Let me take you back to that fateful day in the lawyer's office where my world came crashing down. The mahogany desk felt cold against my palms as Mr. Henderson cleared his throat for the third time. My daughter-in-law Jessica sat across from me, that smug little smile playing on her lips like she already knew something I didn't. The air conditioning hummed overhead, but sweat still beaded on my forehead. Mrs. Johnson, Henderson began, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, your husband's will contains an unusual provision regarding your inheritance. I straightened my spine. After 43 years of marriage to Robert, I deserved whatever he left me. We built our life together in Savannah, brick by brick, dream by dream. The estate is valued at approximately $2.3 million, Henderson continued. Jessica's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. However, there's a condition. My stomach dropped. What kind of condition? Henderson pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in Robert's careful handwriting. You must spend 30 consecutive days alone in his childhood home in Clarksdale, Mississippi. No visitors. No early departures. If you leave before the month is complete, the entire inheritance goes to his children. The room went dead silent. Jessica's smile grew wider. That's ridiculous, I whispered. Robert never talked about that house. Whenever I asked about his childhood in Mississippi, he'd change the subject or make some joke about ancient history. Furthermore, Henderson added, if you choose not to accept this condition within 48 hours, the inheritance automatically transfers to the children. Jessica leaned forward. Evelyn, honey, you don't have to put yourself through this. That old house has been empty for decades. God knows what condition it's in. You should just let it go. Her voice dripped with fake concern, but I could see the greed burning in her eyes. She wanted me to walk away. They all did. Robert's son Marcus wouldn't even look at me, just stared at his phone like this was boring him. What exactly is wrong with the house? I asked Henderson. He shifted uncomfortably. Well, it's been abandoned since Robert left Mississippi in 1979. The locals, they have stories about the place. Probably just small-town gossip, but... What kind of stories? Strange sounds. Lights in the windows when no one's there. Some say it's haunted. He tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. Of course, there's no scientific basis for such claims. I felt something burning in my chest. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was love for the man who'd held me close for 4 decades and whispered promises in the dark. Robert on our wedding night, pulling me against his chest, promise me you'll trust me, no matter what comes. His hands had been so warm, so sure of themselves. Jessica cleared her throat. Evelyn, be reasonable. You're 68 years old. Living alone in some creepy old house. What if something happens to you? That did it. I stood up, my purse clutched tight against my chest. Mr. Henderson, I need the address and the keys. Evelyn, no, Marcus finally spoke up. Dad wouldn't want this for you. I looked at their doubting faces, at Jessica's barely concealed excitement about getting her hands on Robert's money, at Marcus treating me like I was some fragile old woman who couldn't make her own decisions. I accept the condition, I said firmly. I'll be there tomorrow. Would you risk everything for answers about someone you loved? Share your thoughts in the comments below. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, driving deeper into Mississippi backroads that seemed to lead nowhere. The GPS had lost signal 20 miles back, leaving me with Robert's hand-drawn directions from 1979, yellow paper so old it cracked at the folds. Spanish moss hung from ancient oak trees like funeral shrouds, blocking out most of the afternoon sun. Every few miles, I passed another abandoned house, another rusted mailbox, another reminder that people used to live out here before whatever drove them away. The humidity was suffocating. Even with the air conditioning blasting, my cotton dress stuck to my back. This was nothing like the gentle climate of Savannah. This felt angry, oppressive, like the very air wanted me gone. I should have listened to Jessica. What kind of man leaves his wife a puzzle like this? What kind of husband hides an entire house, an entire childhood, from the woman who shared his bed for 43 years? Robert dancing with me at our anniversary party just 6 months ago, his arms still strong despite the cancer eating away at him. You're the only woman I've ever truly loved, he whispered in my ear. His breath was warm, familiar, safe. Now I wondered if those words meant something different than I thought. The car started making a grinding noise. Then steam began pouring from under the hood. No, no, no. I pulled over to the side of the dirt road, surrounded by nothing but trees and the sound of cicadas screaming in the heat. I tried calling for help, but my phone showed no bars. Perfect. Just perfect. 20 minutes later, a pickup truck appeared through the dust. An elderly white man climbed out, wearing coveralls stained with motor oil and 40 years of hard work. Car trouble? His voice was kind, but his eyes kept darting away from mine. Yes, sir. The engine just gave up on me. He popped the hood, poked around for a minute, then stood back shaking his head. Radiator's shot. I can tow you to my shop, get you fixed up by tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? My voice came out higher than I intended. I need to get to the old Johnson place tonight. His face went white. Actually white, like he'd seen a ghost. Ma'am, you don't want to go there. Especially not after dark. Why? What's wrong with it? He wiped his hands on a dirty rag, buying time. That house ain't meant for the living. Been empty too long. Got too many memories. What kind of memories? The kind that don't stay buried. He looked at me directly for the first time. You're Robert's wife, aren't you? The one from Georgia? How did he know that? Yes. Did you know my husband? Knew him when he was younger. Before he left town. The mechanic loaded my car onto his truck with practiced efficiency. Ma'am, I've lived in these parts my whole life. That house, it changes people. Makes them remember things they'd rather forget. As we drove toward his shop, the sun began setting behind the trees. In the distance, I caught my first glimpse of the house through a gap in the moss. My blood turned to ice. Have you ever ignored warnings that later proved true? Let me know in the comments. The Victorian mansion loomed against the darkening sky like something from a nightmare. Paint peeled from its walls like diseased skin, and half the shutters hung crooked on broken hinges. But what made my stomach clench wasn't the decay, it was how familiar it looked. I'd seen this house before. In dreams that woke me gasping. In shadows at the corner of my vision. Robert had never shown me a single photograph, yet somehow I knew that the third window on the left was where the master bedroom sat. I knew that rose garden used to bloom along the front porch. The key turned easily, as if the house was expecting me. Inside, dust particles danced in the last rays of sunlight streaming through broken blinds. The air tasted stale, filled with decades of secrets left to rot. My footsteps echoed on hardwood floors that creaked like old bones. The living room was frozen in time. A 1970s floral couch sat facing a television with rabbit ear antennas. Children's toys scattered across the floor, a wooden truck, a stuffed elephant with one eye missing, building blocks spelling out words I couldn't make sense of in the dim light. But it was the mantelpiece that stopped me cold. There, in a silver frame, sat my wedding photo. Robert and me outside St. Matthew's Church, him in his navy suit, me in my grandmother's pearls. But something was wrong. Robert looked younger in this picture. Not the 35-year-old man I married, but maybe 25. His face was smoother, his smile more innocent. That was impossible. I'd taken that picture with me when we moved to Georgia. It sat on our bedroom dresser for 40 years. How could a copy be here, in a house Robert claimed he'd abandoned? My heart hammered against my ribs as I climbed the stairs. Each step groaned like it was in pain. The banister felt sticky under my palm, as if someone with sweaty hands had gripped it recently. The hallway stretched longer than it should have, lined with doors that stood slightly open, like mouths waiting to swallow me whole. Portraits hung crooked on the walls, stern-faced people in old-fashioned clothes, their eyes seeming to follow my movement. The master bedroom door stood open at the end of the hall. I pushed it wider and nearly screamed. The room was perfect. Not dusty, not abandoned, perfect. The bed was made with military precision, white sheets tucked tight. Fresh flowers sat in a vase on the nightstand, their sweet smell fighting against the mustiness of the rest of the house. This was impossible. I moved toward the closet, my legs shaking. Maybe I'd find answers. Maybe I'd find some logical explanation for why this room looked like someone still lived here. I opened the closet door. Hanging there, preserved like it had been waiting decades for this moment, was a wedding dress. Pure white silk with pearl buttons up the back, a cathedral train that puddled on the closet floor. It wasn't mine. I'd worn my mother's simple blue dress when Robert and I got married. This was something else entirely. Something expensive. Something beautiful. Something that meant my husband had been married before. What would you do if you found evidence of your spouse's secret life? Drop your thoughts below. I couldn't sleep. Every sound in that house felt like a warning: floorboards settling, wind rattling windows, the grandfather clock in the hallway chiming every hour like a countdown to something terrible. At 3 a.m, I gave up and went back to the master bedroom. The wedding dress hung in the closet like a ghost waiting for its body to return. I needed answers, and they had to be somewhere in this house. That's when I noticed it. One floorboard near the window sat higher than the others, like it had been pried up and replaced. I knelt down, running my fingers along the edge until I found a loose section. The board lifted easily. Hidden underneath was a metal box, the kind used for important documents. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. No lock. Just a simple latch that opened with a soft click. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a bundle of letters tied with a red silk ribbon. The first envelope was addressed in Robert's careful handwriting, "My dearest M." The postmark was dated April 15, 1985. 3 years after our wedding. With shaking fingers, I opened it. My beautiful M. I dream about your skin every night. The way you taste like honey and secrets. Evelyn doesn't understand me the way you do. She never could. When I'm with her, I'm playing a role, the good husband, the respectable man. But with you, I'm myself. I need to touch you again. I need to bury myself so deep inside you that we become the same person. Tell me when you can meet me in our special place. Forever yours, R. My vision blurred. The letter fell from my hands like it was on fire. Robert. My Robert. Writing to another woman about things he'd never said to me. Using words that made my stomach turn and my heart break simultaneously. I opened another letter. Then another. Each one more passionate than the last, describing intimate moments, secret meetings, promises of a future together. Letters spanning 35 years of our marriage. While I was cooking his favorite meals, while I was holding his hand through chemotherapy, while I was planning our anniversary parties, he was writing love letters to someone called M. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was how much better he sounded in these letters. More alive. More passionate. More like the man I'd fallen in love with but had somehow lost along the way. Robert, on our 10th anniversary, his hands moving over my body with practiced efficiency. "You're a good wife, Evelyn," he'd whispered afterward. Good. Not beautiful. Not desired. Just good. But with M, he was poetry. With M, he was fire. I opened the final letter, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper steady. "My darling M. The doctors say I don't have long. Evelyn doesn't know yet, I can't bear to see that look in her eyes, like I'm already dead. But you make me feel alive even now. I've arranged everything. She'll have to come to the house. She'll have to face the truth about us. Maybe then she'll understand that what we had was real, while what I had with her was just existing. Wait for me. R." The letter was postmarked 3 weeks before Robert died. How would you cope with discovering a decades-long betrayal? Share your pain in the comments. I sat on that bedroom floor until sunrise, reading every single letter. My heart felt like someone had taken a hammer to it, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know everything. The final letter had something tucked inside the envelope, a photograph that made my breath catch in my throat. She was beautiful. Stunning, actually. Long blonde hair that caught the light like spun gold, bright blue eyes that sparkled with mischief, and a smile that could make any man forget his own name. She looked maybe 30 in the picture, standing in what I now recognized as this very bedroom. But here's what made my blood run cold: she looked exactly like me. Not identical, but close enough that we could have been sisters. The same heart-shaped face, the same small nose, the same way of tilting her head slightly to the left when she smiled. If you put my wedding photo next to this picture, people might think Robert had a type. Or maybe he'd been trying to replace someone. I flipped the photo over. Written in faded ink, Margaret, 1978. Forever yours. Margaret. M. The woman who'd stolen my husband's heart before I even knew his name. 25 days left in this house, and I was already losing my mind. But I couldn't leave. Not now. Not when I was this close to understanding who my husband really was. I spent the rest of the morning searching every inch of that bedroom. Under the mattress, inside dresser drawers, behind picture frames. Robert had been methodical about hiding things, but he'd also been sentimental. There had to be more. That's when I found them, more photographs tucked inside an old jewelry box on the vanity. Pictures of Margaret throughout the years, getting older as I flipped through them. Margaret in a sundress, laughing at something off camera. Margaret in a silk nightgown that made my cheeks burn with jealousy and something else I didn't want to name. Margaret pregnant, her hands resting on her swollen belly while Robert's arms wrapped around her from behind. Pregnant. I dropped the photos like they were poisonous snakes. Margaret had been pregnant. When was this taken? The house records I'd found showed that Robert lived here until 1979, the same year he moved to Georgia and met me. Had there been a child? Where were they now? My hands shook as I gathered the scattered photos. In the bottom of the jewelry box, I found something that made my heart stop completely. A death certificate. Margaret Louise Henderson. Born, March 12, 1948. Died, September 15, 1979. The same day Robert left Mississippi for Georgia. The same day he started his new life with me. Margaret had died the exact same day my husband became available. I sank into the vanity chair, staring at my reflection in the mirror. For 43 years, I'd thought I was Robert's great love story. His fresh start. His happily ever after. But what if I'd just been his replacement? What if everything about our marriage? The way he met me at that coffee shop, the way he courted me with flowers and sweet words, the way he proposed after only 6 months, what if it had all been him trying to recreate what he'd lost? The woman in the mirror looked older than her 68 years. Tired. Used up. Like she'd spent her whole life being someone else's consolation prize. Do you believe in coincidences, or was this something more? Tell me what you think happened. I was so lost in my thoughts that the knock on the front door nearly sent me jumping out of my skin. Nobody knew I was here except the mechanic, and he'd said my car wouldn't be ready until tomorrow. Through the dusty window, I saw an elderly black woman standing on the porch. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a covered dish that smelled like heaven, cornbread, if my nose was right. I opened the door cautiously. Can I help you? Honey, the question is whether I can help you. Her voice was warm molasses over steel. I'm Ruby Washington. I live in the yellow house about a mile down the road. Saw someone finally came back to this place. I'm Evelyn Johnson. I'm just staying here for a month, settling some family business. Ruby's eyebrows shot up. Johnson? You're Robert's wife? You knew my husband? Knew him when he was young and foolish. Before he ran off to Georgia. She held out the covered dish. May I come in? We need to talk. Something in her tone made me step aside. Ruby walked through the house like she'd been here before, her eyes taking in every detail. She set the cornbread on the kitchen counter and turned to face me. Child, you have no idea what you've walked into. What do you mean? Ruby's face was serious as a heart attack. That woman still walks these halls. Margaret. I've seen her in the windows at night, wearing nothing but moonlight and sorrow. My mouth went dry. Margaret's dead. I found her death certificate. Dead don't always mean gone. Especially not when they died the way she did. How did she die? Ruby was quiet for a long moment, like she was deciding how much truth I could handle. Official story was an accident. Fell down the basement stairs, broke her neck. But Margaret knew those stairs like her own heartbeat. She'd lived in this house for 3 years. Are you saying someone killed her? I'm saying a pregnant woman don't just trip and fall when she's planning to leave town the next morning. My legs felt weak. I gripped the counter to steady myself. She was leaving. Had her bags packed, train ticket bought. She was finally done with Robert's promises. Said she was going to have that baby somewhere he couldn't find them. Ruby's voice dropped to a whisper. Next morning, she was dead at the bottom of those basement stairs. But Robert left town the same day. Ran like the devil was chasing him. Which maybe he was. Ruby moved closer, her eyes boring into mine. Evelyn, honey, that woman has been waiting 44 years for another wife to come home. She's got things to tell you. That's impossible. Ghosts aren't real. Ruby laughed, but there was no humor in it. You've been here 2 days. Tell me you haven't felt her presence. Tell me you haven't heard footsteps when you're alone. Tell me you haven't smelled her perfume in the air. I couldn't. Because all of those things had happened. Ruby grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. She's been waiting for another wife to come home. And now you're here. Would you stay in a house with such a dark history? Let me know in the comments. Ruby left at sunset, but her words stayed with me like smoke in my lungs. I tried to convince myself she was just a lonely old woman with too much imagination, but deep down, I knew she was telling the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every whisper of wind through broken windows sounded like voices calling my name. At midnight, I gave up and went downstairs to make tea. Maybe some chamomile would calm my nerves enough to get a few hours of rest. The kitchen was moonlit and peaceful. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and turned around to get a mug from the cabinet. The entire kitchen had been rearranged. The chairs were pushed back from the table like someone had just stood up. 2 place settings sat on the table, plates, silverware, napkins folded just so. Fresh flowers that hadn't been there an hour ago sat in a crystal vase between the settings. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was losing my mind. That was the only explanation. The stress of Robert's death, the shock of his betrayal, the creepiness of this house, it was all making me see things that weren't there. I blinked hard and looked again. The kitchen was exactly as I'd left it. Empty table. No flowers. No place settings. But the smell lingered in the air, something sweet and floral that definitely wasn't my drugstore body wash. The kettle started whistling, a shrill sound that made me jump. As I reached to turn off the burner, I felt it. Fingers trailing along my neck. Light as butterfly wings, but unmistakably real. I spun around. Nobody there. But the air behind me was warm, like someone had just been standing close enough to share breath. Margaret? The name slipped out before I could stop it. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. My breath came out in visible puffs, even though it was September in Mississippi. Then I heard it. A whisper so soft I might have imagined it. He killed me. I ran. Up the stairs, into the master bedroom, slamming the door behind me like a piece of wood could keep out a ghost. My hands shook so hard I could barely turn the lock. But as I leaned against the door, catching my breath, I realized something had changed in the room. The closet door stood open. The wedding dress was gone. In its place hung one of my own dresses, the red one I'd packed for this trip. But it wasn't wrinkled from being in my suitcase. It was pressed, arranged carefully on a satin hanger like someone had been planning an outfit for a special occasion. On the bed, spread out like someone had been deciding what to wear, were pieces of lingerie I'd never seen before. Delicate lace in deep burgundy, the kind of intimate things a woman wears when she wants to drive a man wild with desire. The kind of things Robert had never seen me in, because he'd never asked for them. But maybe Margaret had worn things like this. Maybe she'd known how to make him burn with wanting. I touched the lace, and it felt like touching fire. Not from shame, but from something deeper. Something I'd buried so long I'd forgotten it existed. Have you ever felt the presence of someone who's passed on? Share your experiences below. I didn't sleep at all that night. Instead, I followed the supernatural breadcrumbs Margaret seemed to be leaving for me. If she wanted me to find something, I was going to find it. The library was on the first floor, behind a door I hadn't opened yet. Inside, dust-covered books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Most were classics, Shakespeare, Dickens, books that looked expensive but unloved. But the desk in the corner looked like someone had been using it recently. No dust. Papers arranged in neat stacks. A fountain pen lying beside a half-finished letter. I pulled open the desk drawers one by one. In the bottom drawer, hidden beneath a stack of old bills, I found what Margaret wanted me to see. Her diary. Brown leather, worn smooth by years of handling. My name was written on a piece of paper tucked inside the front cover, for Evelyn. My hands trembled as I opened to the first entry. January 15, 1977. Robert proposed today. He says we'll be married in the spring, as soon as he saves enough for a proper wedding. I've never been so happy. He makes me feel like I'm the only woman in the world. The early entries were full of joy. Margaret writing about wedding plans, about how much she loved Robert, about their dreams of filling this big house with children and laughter. But as the months went on, the tone changed. June 3, 1977. Robert got angry again today when I mentioned wanting to visit my sister. He says a wife's place is with her husband. I know he's right, but sometimes I feel so lonely in this big house. October 10, 1977. He locked me in the bedroom today because I talked to the mailman too long. Says I was flirting. I wasn't. I was just being polite. But Robert says I don't know how men think, how they see a beautiful woman and get ideas. December 22, 1977. I found pictures in Robert's desk. Pictures of other women. When I asked about them, he slapped me. Then he held me and cried, saying he was sorry, that I drove him to it by not trusting him. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am too jealous. I recognize the pattern now. The same one I'd lived through but never named. Robert's jealousy disguised as protection. His control disguised as love. His rage disguised as passion. The entries from 1978 made my stomach turn. March 15, 1978. Pregnant. Robert isn't happy. Says a baby will ruin everything between us, make me fat and boring like other wives. But I can feel life growing inside me, and for the first time in months, I'm not afraid. July 30, 1978. He hits me more now. Says it's the baby's fault, making me moody and difficult. I have to be more careful. If I just try harder to make him happy, maybe he'll love us both. The final entries were from September 1979. September 10, 1979. I can't take it anymore. The baby deserves better. We both do. I'm leaving Friday. The train to Chicago leaves at 6 a.m. By the time Robert wakes up, we'll be gone. September 14, 1979. He found out about my plan. I don't know how, but he knows. He's not angry. He's calm. That scares me more than his rage ever did. He says we need to talk tonight, down in the basement where we can have privacy. The final page was stained with something dark that looked like dried blood. How do you separate love from manipulation in a relationship? Share your thoughts. I carried Margaret's diary upstairs, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold it steady. The final pages were stuck together with something dark and crusty that I didn't want to think about too hard. In the bathroom, I used warm water and a butter knife to carefully separate the pages. What I found made my blood turn to ice water. September 15, 1979, 3 a.m. I'm bleeding. Robert pushed me down the basement stairs, but I'm still alive. My leg is broken, maybe my ribs too. The baby, oh God, I think I'm losing the baby. He's upstairs packing his things. He thinks I'm dead. I can hear him moving around, humming that song he used to sing when we were happy. If someone finds this, know that Robert Johnson killed me. He killed our baby. He's going to leave in the morning and start over somewhere else, and no one will ever know what really happened. My vision is getting blurry. I can taste blood. But I need to finish this. I need someone to know the truth. To the woman who comes after me, and there will be one, because men like Robert can't live alone, don't trust him. Don't believe his sweet words. Don't think you can change him or fix him or love him into being better. He'll tell you that you're different from all the others. Special. The love of his life. He told me the same lies. Check the basement. Behind the furnace. He thinks he hid everything, but I know where the bodies are buried. Bodies. Plural. Tell our stories. Make them matter. The writing got weaker after that, trailing off into illegible scratches. Margaret had died writing those words, trying to warn me from beyond the grave. I sat on the bathroom floor, crying for a woman I'd never met but who tried to save my life 44 years too late. She'd known Robert would find another victim. She'd known he'd bring me here eventually. But why had he waited so long? Why marry me at all if he was going to kill me? Maybe because I was the perfect cover story. The grieving widower who found love again in Georgia, far from the scene of his crimes. Maybe our whole marriage had been his alibi. When I finally stopped crying, I went to the kitchen and found a flashlight. If Margaret said to check behind the furnace, that's exactly what I was going to do. The basement stairs creaked under my weight. Each step down felt like walking into hell itself. The air was thick and stale, filled with the smell of damp earth and something else. Something that made my stomach clench. The furnace sat in the far corner, a monster of rusted metal that looked like it hadn't worked in decades. Behind it, the concrete wall showed signs of being patched and repainted. I ran my hands along the wall until I found a section that felt different. Softer. Newer. Using a screwdriver I'd found on Robert's workbench, I chipped away at the concrete. It came off in chunks, revealing something that made me scream and drop the flashlight. A finger bone. Still wearing a wedding ring. Margaret hadn't been lying. Behind the furnace, Robert had hidden his secrets in a makeshift grave. And from the size of the disturbed area, Margaret hadn't been his only victim. What would you do if you discovered your spouse was a murderer? Tell me in the comments. I don't know how long I sat on those basement stairs, shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. The flashlight beam kept catching that gold wedding band, winking at me like an accusation. Finally, I forced myself to stand up. If I was going to call the police, and I had to call the police, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. Using garden tools from Robert's workbench, I carefully excavated more of the wall. What I found made me wish I'd never come to this cursed house. Not just bones. Personal belongings. A pearl necklace. A watch with a broken band. A locket with a child's picture inside. Each item told the story of a life cut short, a woman who'd trusted the wrong man. Margaret's remains were there, just as she'd promised. Her skull showed a crack consistent with falling downstairs, but her wrists bore marks that looked like rope burns. She'd been tied up before he killed her. But she wasn't alone. I found at least 6 other women buried in that makeshift cemetery. Different ages, different time periods based on their jewelry and clothing remnants. One had been dead so long only bones remained. Another looked more recent, maybe from the early 2000s. My husband hadn't just been a cheater. He'd been a serial killer. And I'd shared his bed for 43 years. The thought made me vomit right there on the basement floor. How many nights had he come home to me after burying another victim? How many times had he made love to me with blood still under his fingernails? That memory from our 5th anniversary suddenly made horrible sense. Robert coming home late, dirt on his clothes, telling me he'd been helping a friend with yard work. He'd been so passionate that night, so hungry for me. I'd thought it was romantic. Now I realized he'd probably just killed someone. I climbed back upstairs on shaking legs, my mind reeling. What was I supposed to do with this information? Call the police and destroy the memory of the man his children loved? Or keep quiet and let these women stay buried and forgotten? But then I thought about Margaret, dying alone in that basement while trying to protect her unborn child. I thought about all those other women, daughters, sisters, mothers, whose families never knew what happened to them. I owed them the truth. My phone finally had a signal in the kitchen. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency? I need to report multiple murders. Old ones. I found bodies buried in a basement. The dispatcher kept me on the line while sending units to the house. Within an hour, the place was crawling with police cars, ambulances, and people in white coats who handled death for a living. Detective Morrison, a tired-looking black woman about my daughter's age, took my statement while crime scene techs worked in the basement. Mrs. Johnson, I have to ask, did you suspect your husband was capable of violence? I thought about all the times Robert had gripped my wrist too tight when he was angry. The way he'd isolated me from friends who asked too many questions. The control disguised as concern. I thought I knew him, I whispered. But I didn't know him at all. The phone rang at midnight. A voice whispered, stop digging, or join her. Is justice worth destroying innocent people's lives? Let me know what you think. 3 days had passed since I called the police, and the house felt different. Not empty, watched. Every shadow seemed to hide eyes. Every creak of the old wood sounded like footsteps that weren't mine. I'd moved my things to the downstairs bedroom, closer to the exits. Ruby had insisted on staying with me after that midnight phone call, sleeping on the living room couch with a shotgun across her lap like some kind of guardian angel. Child, you stirred up a hornet's nest, she said over coffee that morning. Some folks in this town got secrets they'll kill to protect. The police had finished their initial work in the basement, but the investigation was just beginning. Detective Morrison told me they'd found evidence of at least 7 different women buried down there. 7 lives cut short by the man I'd called husband. That afternoon, while Ruby dozed in her chair, I went back to searching through Robert's belongings. I needed to understand how deep this went. In the back of his bedroom closet, behind winter coats that smelled like mothballs and lies, I found a metal filing cabinet. Inside were photographs. Hundreds of them. Not family photos. Not vacation snapshots. These were different. Intimate. Private moments captured without permission, women undressing, bathing, sleeping. Some looked recent. Others had that faded quality of decades-old film. My stomach clenched as I recognized locations. Our bedroom in Savannah. Our kitchen. The garden where I'd spent countless hours tending roses while he watched from the window. He'd been photographing me for 43 years, and I never knew. But the worst discovery came at the bottom of the pile. A photograph that made my hands shake so hard I nearly dropped it. Me, standing in this very kitchen just last week. Wearing the yellow sundress I'd packed for this trip. Hair pulled back in the messy bun I only wore when I thought I was alone. Someone had been in this house. Someone had been watching me. Ruby. My voice cracked like a teenager's. She was beside me in seconds, taking one look at the photograph before grabbing my arm. Pack your things. Now. But the investigation. The investigation can happen without you being bait. Her eyes were hard as flint. Whoever took that picture wants you to find it. They're playing games. As if summoned by our conversation, the phone rang. Ruby and I stared at each other before I picked it up. Hello? You should have left when you had the chance. The voice was male, rough with age and cigarettes. Robert's business is finished. Let sleeping dogs lie. Who is this? Someone who knows what happens to curious women in this town. Ask Margaret. The line went dead. Ruby was already throwing my clothes into my suitcase. We're staying at my place tonight. Tomorrow, you're going back to Georgia. I can't leave. Not now. These women deserve justice. Justice won't mean much if you're dead. She paused in her packing, her dark eyes meeting mine. Child, I've lived in this town for 73 years. I know who's got blood on their hands, and it ain't just Robert. That night, lying in Ruby's spare bedroom, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I was brave enough to see this through. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew, lonesome and hollow, like the sound of secrets refusing to stay buried. What would you do if your quest for truth put you in mortal danger? Share your thoughts below. I woke up to the sound of breaking glass. Ruby was already moving, shotgun in hand, motioning for me to stay quiet. We crept through her small house toward the living room, where moonlight streamed through what used to be her front window. A figure stood in the middle of her living room, silhouetted against the pale light. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Evening, ladies. His voice was the same one from the phone. Y'all are harder to find than I expected. Ruby raised the shotgun. Get out of my house, Tom Johnson. Tom Johnson. Robert's older brother. I'd met him exactly once, at Robert's funeral, where he'd barely spoken to me and left before the reception. Now, Ruby, don't go making this harder than it needs to be. Tom stepped closer, and I could see his face now. Same sharp cheekbones as Robert, same cold blue eyes. I just need to have a conversation with Robert's widow here. Conversation about what? I tried to keep my voice steady. Tom laughed, but there was no humor in it. About you sticking your nose where it don't belong. About you ruining a good family's name over some old bones that should have stayed buried. Those bones belonged to real people. Women who had families. Dreams. Women who made bad choices. Tom moved closer to Ruby, apparently unconcerned about the shotgun pointed at his chest. Just like you're making right now. Ruby's finger tightened on the trigger. Tom, I've known you since you were in diapers, and you were no good then either. What did you know about Robert's activities? Tom's expression shifted, became almost wistful. I knew Robert had a way with women. Always did, even as a boy. They flocked to him like moths to flame. couldn't seem to help themselves. So you helped him kill them? I helped him clean up his messes. Tom's voice was matter of fact, like he was discussing yard work. Family takes care of family. That's how it works in places like this. My blood turned to ice water. How many others knew? Enough to keep quiet. Sheriff was our cousin. Mayor married our sister. When Robert left town, we all breathed easier. Thought the problem had moved on. But he kept killing. The words came out as a whisper. Tom shrugged. Not my concern once he left Mississippi. But now you've gone and stirred everything up again. Got the FBI asking questions. Making people nervous. Ruby took a step forward. So you decided to eliminate the problem. Nothing personal. Just business. Tom reached inside his jacket and pulled out a revolver. Same way we handled Margaret when she threatened to go to the authorities. The shotgun blast was deafening in the small room. Tom stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder, his own gun skittering across the floor. Ruby pumped another shell into the chamber. Next one goes through your heart, she said calmly. Tom looked at us both, his eyes wide with pain and something that might have been respect. You have no idea how deep this goes. Robert was just the beginning. Then he lunged for his fallen weapon. Ruby didn't hesitate. The second blast echoed through the night like thunder. Tom Johnson died on Ruby's hardwood floor, taking his secrets with him. How far would you go to protect the truth from those who want it buried? Tell me in the comments. The FBI arrived at dawn, swarming Ruby's house and the Johnson property like ants at a picnic. Special Agent Martinez, a sharp-eyed woman about my age, took our statements while crime scene techs processed Tom's body. Mrs. Johnson, based on what you've told us, we need to expand our search. Martinez set down her notepad and looked at me directly. Your brother-in-law's final words suggest this was bigger than one man's crimes. 3 days later, they found the rest. Behind the house, hidden beneath what looked like an old flower garden, ground-penetrating radar revealed disturbed earth in a pattern that made my stomach turn. Not random graves, but organized rows. Like a cemetery for the forgotten. I stood at Ruby's kitchen window, watching the excavation equipment tear up what used to be Robert's mother's rose garden. Each time they pulled up another set of remains, wrapped in rotting cloth and decades of silence, I felt a piece of my soul break off and blow away. 13 women. 13 lives stolen and buried like trash. The oldest remains dated back to 1965, when Robert would have been just 17. The youngest was from 2003, a college student who'd disappeared during spring break, her case gone cold when local police claimed she'd probably run off with some boy. My phone rang constantly. Reporters wanting statements. Talk show producers offering money for my story. Robert's children calling to scream at me for destroying their father's memory. How could you do this to us? Marcus sobbed into the phone. He was our dad. Our hero. He was a monster, I said quietly. And I'm sorry you had to learn that this way. You're lying. You're making this up for attention. I hung up and turned off my phone. Agent Martinez found me sitting on Ruby's porch that evening, watching the crime scene lights illuminate the nightmare across the street. We've identified 9 of the 13 victims so far, she said, settling into the chair beside me. Families are driving in from all over the country. Women who've been wondering for decades what happened to their daughters, their sisters. Do they hate me for waiting so long to speak up? They're grateful someone finally did. Martinez handed me a folder. These are letters from the families. You don't have to read them now, but when you're ready. That night, I opened the folder. Letter after letter from parents who'd never stopped looking, siblings who'd never stopped hoping, children who'd grown up without their mothers. Mrs. Johnson, wrote one mother from Alabama, my daughter Jenny disappeared in 1987. She was 19, studying to be a teacher. Thank you for giving us the courage to finally lay her to rest. Another, from a sister in Florida, Sarah was supposed to be my maid of honor. She vanished 3 weeks before my wedding. I've carried that empty space in my heart for 36 years. Now I can finally say goodbye. By the time I finished reading, my face was streaked with tears. Not just for these women and their families, but for myself. For the 43 years I'd spent loving a man who saw women as objects to be collected and discarded. The media circus grew larger each day. News vans lined the street. Helicopters circled overhead. Someone started a conspiracy theory online that I'd killed all those women and was framing my dead husband. Agent Martinez assigned protection detail after the third death threat arrived in Ruby's mailbox. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, "how are you holding up?" I looked out at the chaos surrounding us. I keep thinking about Margaret. How she tried to warn me from beyond the grave. These women deserved better than being buried in silence. How do communities heal after discovering such darkness in their midst? Share your thoughts below. The call came at 3 in the morning, 2 weeks after Tom's death. Agent Martinez's voice was tight with exhaustion and something that sounded like awe. "Mrs. Johnson, we need you to come to the house. We found something." Ruby drove me through the empty streets, past the news vans and sleeping protesters who'd been camping outside the police station. The Johnson house was lit up like a movie set, FBI agents moving through rooms with methodical precision. Martinez met me at the door. We brought in structural engineers to examine the house for more hidden spaces. What we found, it changes everything. She led me to the basement, where teams had torn away sections of the concrete floor. Beneath, they'd uncovered a room I never knew existed. Stone walls, probably dating to the original construction. But it wasn't the age of the room that made my breath catch. It was what was inside. Filing cabinets lined every wall, filled with photographs, documents, and what looked like trophies. Personal items from victims, jewelry, clothing, handwritten letters they'd never sent. "Mrs. Johnson, this goes back generations." Martinez handed me a file folder. We found records showing Robert's father and grandfather were involved. This family has been killing women for over 80 years. The folder contained newspaper clippings from the 1940s. Missing women. Unsolved cases. Always young, always beautiful, always dismissed by local authorities as runaways or troublemakers. But what made my knees buckle was the final document in the file. A marriage certificate. Robert Johnson and Evelyn May Turner, dated January 15, 1982. My wedding date. But that wasn't my maiden name. "Agent Martinez, this isn't right. My maiden name was Williams, not Turner." She opened another folder, this one thick with official documents. Birth certificates, death certificates, medical records. "Mrs. Johnson, we ran background checks on everyone connected to this case. There is no record of an Evelyn May Williams born on your birthday in Atlanta, Georgia." The room spun around me. That's impossible. But there is a record of Evelyn May Turner. Born in Savannah. Reported missing in January 1982, never found. I sat down hard in the nearest chair. "You're saying I'm a missing person?" "We're saying someone very carefully created a new identity for you. New social security number, new birth certificate, new history. The question is whether you were part of the deception or another victim." The memories came flooding back then. Things I'd pushed down, dismissed, forgotten. Waking up in a hospital with no memory of how I got there. Robert sitting beside my bed, holding my hand, telling me I'd been in an accident. That I'd lost some memories, but he'd helped me remember who I was. How he'd isolated me from anyone who might have known the real Evelyn Williams. How we'd moved to a new city where no one knew us. How he'd been so patient with my confusion, so helpful in building our life together. "He didn't just murder other women," I whispered. "He murdered me too. The real me." Martinez nodded grimly. "We think Robert saw you somewhere, became obsessed, and arranged to kidnap you. But instead of killing you like the others, he decided to keep you. Brainwash you into becoming his perfect wife. I thought about all those years of marriage. How Robert had controlled every aspect of our life together. How he'd gotten angry whenever I showed too much independence or curiosity about my past. The inheritance condition, I said slowly. He knew if I came here, I'd find the truth about everything. Including myself. We think he wanted you to know before you died. One final act of control. Who was I before Robert stole my identity? And how do you reclaim a life that was taken from you 43 years ago? Let me know your thoughts. 6 months later, I stood in the garden behind what used to be the Johnson house, now transformed into something beautiful. The Memphis Victims Services Foundation had purchased the property, tearing down the House of Horrors and building a memorial garden in its place. 13 white stone markers bore the names of the women we'd identified. An empty 14th stone waited, inscribed simply, "For those still unknown." The FBI investigation had uncovered a network spanning 3 states and 4 generations. Robert's family had been trafficking, murdering, and burying women since the 1920s, protected by a web of corrupt officials and silent community members who valued reputation over justice. My own story had taken longer to unravel. Through DNA testing and record searches, they traced the real Evelyn Williams to a small town outside Atlanta. She'd been a kindergarten teacher, engaged to be married, with dreams of having children and growing old with someone who truly loved her. Robert had seen her at a gas station and followed her home. The hospital records showed she'd been drugged, not injured in an accident. He'd literally rewritten her life, keeping her sedated for weeks while he created the fiction of Evelyn Johnson. I still didn't remember being Evelyn Williams. Maybe I never would. But I'd learned to make peace with being someone new, someone forged by trauma but not defined by it. The foundation work gave me purpose. We'd helped reunite 3 other victims' families with their loved ones' remains. We'd lobbied for new laws requiring DNA testing in cold cases. We'd trained law enforcement to recognize patterns of organized predatory behavior. Ruby had moved to Memphis to work with me, her sharp wit and protective instincts making her perfect for counseling other survivors. "Child," she'd tell women who came to us broken and afraid, "survival is just the first step. Recovery is where the real work begins." My relationship with Robert's children remained complicated. Marcus had eventually apologized, horror-struck by the evidence we'd uncovered. He donated his inheritance to the foundation and changed his name. But Jessica still blamed me for everything, spreading lies on social media about how I'd fabricated the entire story for attention. I'd learned to let that go. Some people would rather believe comfortable lies than uncomfortable truths. Standing in that garden, surrounded by the names of women who'd never gotten to live their full stories, I thought about second chances. About how identity isn't just what happens to you, but what you choose to do with what happens to you. A young woman approached, Sarah Chen, a survivor we'd helped escape a trafficking ring in Houston. She was starting college in the fall, planning to study criminal justice. "Mrs. Johnson, the ceremony is about to start." I nodded, taking one last look at the memorial stones. Today we were dedicating the garden and announcing our partnership with the FBI's cold case unit. More families would find answers. More predators would be stopped. As I walked toward the small crowd gathered for the ceremony, I caught my reflection in a window. Silver hair pulled back confidently, shoulders straight, eyes clear and determined. I didn't know who Evelyn Williams had been. But I knew exactly who Evelyn Johnson was becoming. Sometimes the inheritance we receive isn't money, it's the courage to demand truth, seek justice, and transform pain into purpose. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to reclaim your life and fight for what's right.